Are you an absolute beginner with your camera? Wonder what all those shutter speeds and aperture sizes mean? Well, this video is for you because I'm going to explain with a few household objects exactly how your shutter and aperture work. So I'm just going to go into a kitchen cupboard, take out some stuff. We've got some lens wipe. Who's going to use what? These are going to be our shutter. Some chewing gum packets and some tissues. The man's a fool. So let's get our everyday stuff from the cupboard and see if we can't work out what's happening in a camera. Here we have tissues, and this is going to play the part of the camera sensor. Whoa, hang on. I don't understand what's going on here. Can we put some sort of outline of a camera down so I can understand how this actually works? Ah, now that's better. Carry on. So the light hits this front bit here. And as the light comes in through the camera, it's got two things to go through. It's got a shutter, and a shutter's just made up of two blades, like a pair of curtains. It opens and closes, opens and closes. Whether it opens and closes really quickly to let a tiny bit of light in, or slowly to let a lot of light in, depends on how light the picture is, whether it's a light picture or a dark picture. Similarly, right at the front here on the lens, we have an aperture. So essentially, that's like the iris of your eye. It's just a hole that the light is going to travel through. There. If it's a small, tiny hole like that, not much light is going to travel through. But if it's a large hole like that, like f2.8, lots of light is going to be able to travel through. And these two things here, the shutter speed, the speed that the shutter opens and closes, and the size of the aperture, the f-stop, they're the two things that are going to determine how much light comes through here and gets to the sensor, which the sensor records as the image. And these two things are inversely proportional. That's quite important. And what that means is, if, for argument's sake, we're going to say that at that size hole of the aperture, the shutter, to expose perfectly, needs to open for 1 second. So that's 1001. The light went through, recorded on here, and it's a perfect exposure. But if we didn't want this size hole here, we wanted a much bigger hole because we wanted a shallow depth of field, we wanted a bigger hole as possible, big aperture, f2, 2.8, then to get the same amount of light to record here on the sensor, this is going to have to open and close much faster, because if it still does its 1 second, there'll be too much light and it'll be overexposed. So if this is 4 times bigger, then this has to operate 4 times faster. So instead of a second, it'll be half a second, it'll be a quarter of a second, an eighth of a second, 20th of a second, let's say. So it's going to say, there you go, same exposure as before. So, why would we want to change these? Well, when you have a small little hole at the front here, that doesn't let much light through, so the shutter needs to be open for a long time. When the hole is small, lots of parts of the picture stay sharp. It has the maximum depth of field, and that means that foreground objects will stay sharp and background objects will stay sharp as well. When the shutter is open for a long time, to compensate for that, the shutter being open a long time means that we are going to do things like blur movement, or we're going to be able to do things like capture light trails or keep the shutter open in dark conditions so that we capture light building up on the lens, like fireworks for instance. So you can see the benefits of having a small aperture and a long shutter speed. Hey, don't forget to explain that if the shutter speed is too low, just the shaking from your hands is going to make everything blurry. If you're not using a tripod, you need to use a shutter speed of a 60th of a second or above to stop your hands making the image blurry. On the other side of the coin, if we wanted a large aperture, that would mean lots of light coming through, and this shutter is going to have to fire very quickly. The benefits of a large aperture, like 2.8, is that not many things are going to stay sharp other than the thing that you focus on. It's got a shallow depth of field. And that means you can take a picture of somebody and the background will go blurred. This is an effect that we call bokeh, and it's really good for pulling the subject away from the background. In the same instance, the shutter will have to fire very fast when the aperture is wide to compensate for the amount of light coming in. And a fast shutter speed is going to allow us to freeze the action. It's going to allow us to capture sport. It's going to allow us to stop running water. It's going to allow us to take a picture of a car going by and it won't be blurred. Anything that's moving will be captured and pin sharp with no movement if we have a fast shutter speed. So the relationship between these is inversely proportional. As the shutter speed gets faster, so the aperture gets wider, and as the aperture closes down, so the shutter speed slows down. I hope that's explained how shutters and apertures work, their relationship together, and let's put that into practice. The next video is going to be how we take some pictures with slow shutter speeds out at night to capture light trails. So we already know we want to capture light trails, so we want the shutter to be open for a long time. And if we want the shutter to be open for a long time, it's either got to be very dark, well it will be, we're going to be doing it at night, or we would have to make sure that we have a very small hole here, not letting much light through. And if we're doing it during the day and there's still too much light coming through and we can't get any lower than say a 30th, 60th of a second, but we actually want to make water in a waterfall appear to be all misty and rolling around, what we'd have to do is artificially make it darker, and we do that by putting a neutral density filter on the front of the lens. That's just a grey filter. It doesn't have any colour in it, but what it does, you can have one that takes 2 times the amount of light, 3 times, 4 times the amount of light, and you put them on the front of the lens, and they make the whole thing darker, which means that we can have a slow shutter speed, maybe 8 seconds, and the water's moving and building up as mist on the picture, and then the shutter closes again. So I hope that has explained with a few household objects like chewing gum. Other chewing gums are available. We haven't been paid by these people, so go out, experiment with your camera and see if you can do some pictures and choose a fast shutter speed by changing the aperture and a slow shutter speed. Hope that helps.